think what really came through is that President Trump himself, he cares about the average American, he cares about affordability.
I think it was a desperate attempt to try to sell the American people that they're winning, when the American people know that they're not.
This is Today as It Happened. Good Wednesday evening. I'm Holly Furfar, guiding you through our timeline of the day's most important news. From voter reaction to President Trump's State of the Union speech, to the confirmation hearing for wellness influencer Casey Means to be the U.S. Surgeon General. But first, our international correspondent in Paris gave us a look at how world leaders are responding to President Trump's address.
Members of Congress and my fellow Americans, our nation is back, bigger, better, richer, and stronger than ever before.
The longest State of the Union address in history was delivered last night by President Trump, touching on everything from the economy, the election, security, border security, and tariffs. The president also lauded his efforts internationally, claiming to have ended several wars, working still on Ukraine and Russia, and also how he's handling the situation in Iran. So let's bring in Scripps News international correspondent Ross Cullen live for us in Paris with reaction overseas. And Ross, what were people saying about the president's address as it directly involved Europeans when it came to these wars?
Yeah, that's right, Holly. With Iran, we know that the president did speak about the situation at the moment, the tense standoff between Tehran and Washington. All eyes in Europe in terms of the Iran talks were on Washington last night. They'll be on Geneva tomorrow for the American-Iranian delegations meeting. We know that the president did say that he would want to see diplomacy be the preferred priority for the administration at the moment, choosing diplomacy first. He also did say that the United States will never allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. Let's listen in now to a little bit more of what the president had to say.
And they're working to build missiles that will soon reach the United States of America. After Midnight Hammer, they were warned to make no future attempts to rebuild their weapons program, and in particular, nuclear weapons. Yet they continue, starting it all over. We wiped it out, and they want to start all over again. They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon.
So those diplomatic talks, which we'll be following very closely here on Scripps News in the Swiss city of Geneva tomorrow, seen as the possible last-ditch chance for negotiations to succeed, or else the United States might resort to military action against Iran.
And Ross, President Trump, we heard, chided the Supreme Court justices in attendance for their recent decision on tariffs, but he also then did double down, saying he has other methods to reenact them. So how is that being viewed, and how will that be viewed overseas when he goes forward?
Well, Europeans and European politicians in particular, Holly, are frustrated by the unpredictability of the economic policy making in the White House. There was that anger in April last year when the president announced those sweeping global tariffs. Then they managed to have negotiations and get a commercial trade accord over the line agreed between Donald Trump and Ursula von der Leyen in July last year. But a vote was meant to take place this week in the European Parliament to ratify that trade deal. That vote was put on pause because of the Supreme Court's decision last week to strike down some of those tariffs, which the president has now reenacted. European politicians simply arguing that what European companies and European consumers want is predictability and stability when it comes to the economic landscape, arguing also that the American public and American companies also prefer a reliable market to one that is characterized by unpredictability. Holly?
International correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris for us. Thank you, Ross. We appreciate it. And in other news, Mexico sent more than 1,000 tons of humanitarian aid to Cuba on Tuesday. The Mexican Navy says the cargo includes beans and powdered milk aboard 2 logistics support vessels. That shipment departed from the port of Veracruz and will take 4 days to reach the island. This aid comes as Cuba continues to face economic challenges and food shortages. And cities from Maryland to Maine now scrambling to clear feet of snow that was left after the latest massive winter storm this week. New York City has spread 143 million pounds of salt, while snowplows cleared paths for emergency vehicles. The mayor offering people $30 an hour to shovel that snow, and they better hurry, as another storm is expected today, creating more work ahead. Parts of some cities are being described as impassable islands. Coming up on Today As It Happened, will President Trump's State of the Union address Tuesday night sway voters? Scripps News political director Andrew Rafferty is here with more analysis just after the break. And later.
Would you encourage other mothers to have their children vaccinated against measles with the MMR vaccine?
Like you, I'm a physician. I believe vaccines save lives. I believe that vaccines are a key part of any infectious disease public health strategy.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's return to our briefing of the day's top stories. Reaction is pouring in after President Trump delivered the longest State of the Union speech in American history. But whether or not it was effective depends on who you ask.
Big picture, this was a speech to the party, not necessarily a speech to the nation.
This was not America's State of the Union. This was Donald Trump's state of delusion. He's in a bubble. He doesn't even know what the average American is going through.
And no surprise, President Trump's State of the Union address got largely positive reviews from Republicans, largely negative reviews by Democrats. But what sort of impact did it have on voters? Scripps News political director Andrew Rafferty joins us now live from our D.C. newsroom. And Rafa, did the president do anything to win back voters who might feel the country is going on the wrong track?
Yeah, well, Holly, good morning, and we can just set up the stage here because I do think this was a particularly important moment for Donald Trump, probably the most important in his second term of office. He went into last night with slipping approval ratings, dropping to historic lows, not only for his own presidency, but all the commanders in chief. If you look at where he fell from February of last year to where he was going into last night, it's about 8-point drop. Some polls, as you have covered, had him even lower, almost similar to where he was after the January 6, 2021 attacks on the Capitol. So what did we hear from the president last night? Well, it was, at least at the start, a bit of an economic message. And I think that for Republicans, especially those who are going to be on the ballot this November, that was a relief. You've heard the White House and Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, a number of White House top aides talking about how they want to get the president talking more about affordability, hitting the road, and talking about the issues that are most important to voters. We know that that is, by and large, the thing that is the top of the list that people wanted to hear last night. You also mentioned that it was a particularly long speech. There wasn't a whole lot new either. Usually, especially in the first year in office, you hear a lot of calls on Congress to pass things, for some forward-looking, some more visionary things from the president. We heard a lot of stuff about what he has done over the past year plus, not a whole lot about what he is going to do. But I did go back, Holly, and look at just how the public reacted to previous State of the Union addresses given under Donald Trump. And he did get a little bit of a bump into the polls, about 1.7 points. This is, again, that approval rating between February of last year to now. And if you look back of those State of the Unions, he gave 3 official State of the Unions. Last night was his 4th, and we saw there was a slight bounce, under 2 points, for some of those voters who haven't been paying attention to everything politics going on over the past year. It maybe was an opportunity to sort of level set with them. And so we're going to actually have some new numbers out later this week on the people who did watch last night. Let them digest, let them think about what they heard, and see if it actually did sway public opinion. If it did, it generally is pretty small, and it generally doesn't last very long.
And Raph, what about Democrats? Did their strategy of boycotting, multiple responses on the House floor, did it seem effective?
Yeah, well, look, I think when you're the party out of power, the biggest thing is do no harm, right? You think about some of those State of the Union responses from Republicans, from Democrats, and there have been some awkward moments in the past. It is a particularly difficult speech to give. We didn't see anything like that last night. Abigail Spanberger getting largely good reviews and no sort of notable, memorable moments in a negative way from that. As you mentioned, we saw a lot of Democrats boycott. Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of Democrats in the House, saying, if you don't have anything nice to say, just leave, knowing that some of the props that members brought in the past, some of the shouting, getting kicked out. We did see that with Al Green last night, but by and large, that was not the image that they were trying to portray. But you had on leader or spokesperson of the Democratic Party. They have their own troubles. Yes, they look to be in good standing going into the midterms as we sit here in late February. But by and large, voters are very skeptical of where the party is heading, especially when it comes to the economy, because we've seen, of course, we've been talking about how President Trump has low ratings on the economy. Well, Democrats do too. And even if they can motivate folks to come out in November as essentially a vote against Trump, there are bigger questions about the future of the party. It was interesting seeing Governor Spanberger, sort of a more moderate face of the party who just had a big victory in November, being chosen as a person to deliver that message last night. And I think it's going to be health care. It's going to be a more humane immigration policy that we see so many Democrats across the country running on, to maybe get a little bit more confidence, not only in the voters who are dissatisfied with Donald Trump and want to vote against him, but people who maybe want to rally around the Democratic Party going forward.
Right, Scripps News political director Andrew Rafferty live for us. Thank you for that analysis. Appreciate it. Now let's take a quick look at some of the other major headlines from today. Another loss for the Department of Justice. A federal judge ruled it may not search through the contents of several devices seized from a Washington Post reporter's home. They were seized earlier this year in a probe into leaked classified documents. This comes about 6 weeks after the judge gave the government permission to raid the reporter's home to seize a phone, 2 computers, and a Garmin watch. The judge is concerned investigators will use the search warrant he approved to peer into parts of that reporter's data that are unrelated to the leak investigation. At this hour, the reporter is not under investigation. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has announced its nominees for 2026, and as always, some fans are ecstatic, while some others might be disappointed. This year's list is the largest ever, with 17 artists. They include Phil Collins, Lauryn Hill, the Wu-Tang Clan, Shakira, and Luther Vandross. The only artist to make the Hall of Fame in their first year of eligibility is Pink. And student protests at Iranian universities are spreading as the academic year begins. Now, this is an overnight report by Human Rights Watch that says the Iranian regime is committing human rights abuses. It details arbitrary arrests, torture, and forced disappearances of protesters, including children, as well as sexual and gender-based violence at detention centers. Now, those protesters, including those children, are reportedly at risk for the death penalty. Straight ahead on Today's It Happened.
I'm a medical doctor. I graduated from Stanford University School of Medicine. I have a medical license. My professional history is a feature, it's not a bug. I have had a unique history that has merged entrepreneurship, public health advocacy, faculty, course direction at Stanford University, as well as being an editor of a medical journal and a biomedical researcher.
Welcome back to Today's It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Why don't we continue our walk through the day's top stories?
A short while ago, the woman who wants to be the nation's top doc was grilled on Capitol Hill. Casey Means, who is a wellness influencer, has faced significant criticism from both sides of the aisle. She's never practiced medicine or, for that matter, held a position in government. Scripps News senior Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen is live in our D.C. newsroom. And Stephanie, tell us why she is considered to be such a controversial pick.
Hey, Del, good afternoon. Well, as you mentioned, this has, her history being a doctor and treating patients. That is something that came up from a couple Democrats on this committee, pressing her on the fact that she has an inactive medical license currently. She's licensed out of the state of Oregon. However, she really pushed back on the way that has been interpreted in the media, saying that she voluntarily has an inactive medical license purely because she doesn't see patients on a regular basis. And she testified that she could go through the process with the Oregon State Medical Board to reactivate her license, but she did not necessarily intend to do that if she gets the position as Surgeon General, because she still would not be seeing patients on a regular basis as part of her job as Surgeon General. Now, as you mentioned, she is a wellness influencer, she's an entrepreneur, she's an author. She is certainly aligned with Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement. She testified that some of what she would want to focus on is trying to get at the root causes of some of the chronic illnesses and diseases that Americans face. And some of that is as simple as getting Americans to eat healthier food, trying to stop the amount of super processed food that Americans rely on for a large portion of their diet. But she acknowledged that eating healthy is expensive and it's not something that is accessible for all families. So she testified to the senators today that would be part of what she would want to work on if she were confirmed as Surgeon General.
Stephanie, there's been a lot of back and forth. Do Democrats and Republicans agree on anything with this nominee?
Well, there were some areas of agreement, especially on the Democratic side. For example, Senator Bernie Sanders, the ranking member on the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, he spoke with Means about their agreement on TV advertisements, saying that they both believe and agree that pharmaceutical companies should not be advertising on TV, that those super processed foods that they agree that Americans should not be relying on so much for a main portion of their diet, those super processed foods shouldn't be advertising on TV either. So there were some areas of agreement with Democrats, and we heard a couple members of the committee make that point, and when they took their 5 minutes to question Casey Means. But there are, I would argue, especially on the Democratic side, more areas of concern than there are areas of agreement.
Would you encourage other mothers to have their children vaccinated against measles with the MMR vaccine?
Like you, I'm a physician. I believe vaccines save lives. I believe that vaccines are a key part of any infectious disease public health strategy. And I would work with you, the CDC, the NIH, ACIP,
But would you
FDA.
encourage mothers to vaccinate their children with the MMR vaccine, seeing how we've had children die and this outbreak in South Carolina?
I'm supportive of vaccination. I do believe that each patient, mother, parent needs to have a conversation with their pediatrician about any medication they're putting in their body or their children's bodies.
You're the nation's doctor. Would you encourage her to have her child vaccinated?
I'm not an individual's doctor, and every individual needs to talk to their doctor before putting a medication in their body. I absolutely am supportive of the measles vaccine, and I do believe vaccines save lives and are an important part of the public health strategy.
That was the Republican chairman of this committee, Senator Bill Cassidy, who pressed her, as you heard, on vaccines. And he talked specifically about the measles vaccine, the MMR vaccine, because of the current measles outbreaks that are happening in the U.S. and the U.S.'s status, as with the measles being in elimination status, is at risk with the number of measles cases we're seeing in the country right now. So that was one vaccine that was focused on. There was a lot of focus also on the hepatitis B vaccine, which has been undergoing some possible changes in terms of its CDC recommendation right now. And lawmakers were really pressing Casey Means on some past comments that she had made on the hepatitis B vaccine and whether that should be given to all children shortly after their birth. And Means, in almost all of the questions on vaccines, really resisted saying yes or no directly, which is what the senators were wanting her to say. And she really relied more on encouraging doctors to have robust conversations with their patients and saying that patients should be able to have enough time with their doctors to get all of their questions answered, to talk about the risks and talk about the benefits of any vaccine. But she really hesitated, saying, yes, I support this vaccine, or no, I don't support that vaccine. That wasn't really an answer that we got out of her today.
Stephanie, now to the bottom line. Will she survive?
That's a question. I think definitely based on some of the lines of questioning that we heard from even Republicans on this committee. Senator Susan Collins, a key moderate and swing vote in the Senate, actually pressed Casey Means on a portion of her book where she talked about experimenting with psychedelics and experimenting with mushrooms. And Collins raised concerns about the potential Surgeon General being open about using illicit drugs, that was something she's very concerned about. After all the senators had gone through their hearings, the Senate chair, as he can, took a second round of questioning with Casey Means and was really, again, trying to press her for those clear answers that she really just wasn't giving. And Senator Cassidy has raised a lot of concerns as the ranking member on this, or as the chairman on this committee, about a number of the health officials that have been appointed and confirmed in this second Trump administration. So Means will first need to survive a vote in the committee. There are more Republicans than there are Democrats in the committee, and depending on what Collins and Cassidy do, we'll see if she makes it even out of committee. And then once it gets to the Senate floor, if we're looking at all 100 senators present and voting, she could lose up to 3 Republican votes, assuming all Democrats were to vote against her, and still get confirmed with the Vice President J.D. Vance breaking that tie. But if all the Democrats vote against her and she loses support of 4 Republicans, that would be enough to block her confirmation. So I certainly don't think it's a 100% clear path ahead of her. There are Republicans, key Republicans, that have certain questions and concerns about her potentially becoming the Surgeon General.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
Sounds like he thinks he can keep tariffs in place without having to come to Congress, which, according to the law that he referenced, putting those 15% tariffs in place, he does need congressional approval in 150 days.
I think it's not even legit before the 150 days. So I think he's going to lose this again in the courts.
But the second is that we needed President Trump to put some energy behind it because my Republican colleagues, quite frankly, were hesitant to act if they didn't have presidential approval. So I made the case to President Trump when I was at a bill signing. We could still do this, and we should do it.
And to be clear, Del, President Trump urged Democrats to support his Republican great health care plan. He did not appear to extend an olive branch instead to any sort of bipartisan solution. And even though there's been these attempts to try and find something that would look like common ground on health care, as we approach the midterm elections, it seems less and less likely that lawmakers will be able to reach an agreement again before the midterms. Democrats have focused squarely on this. They likely will continue to focus on it. A handful of Republicans have been trying to negotiate a solution to lower health care costs with Democrats. It sounds like those talks, though, toward the beginning of this year did fizzle out. The fact that there's an ongoing partial government shutdown, that certainly did not help any focus on health care as lawmakers continue to not see eye to eye on how to fund the Department of Homeland Security, let alone deal with, of course, the health care issue.
Yeah, if there was an olive branch, it more closely resembled that switch my grandmother used to tell me to go get after I acted up. But back to that partial government shutdown, any movement on that?
At this point, it doesn't seem like there is any. Yesterday, the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer telling us that Republicans have not made good faith overtures to Democrats with some of the changes that Democrats have demanded from the Department of Homeland Security in order to unlock that funding. The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries telling reporters yesterday that it's been some time since the White House and Democrats on Capitol Hill have spoken about some sort of solution to the health care plan. So at this point, have spoken about a solution to reopen the federal government. So at this point, it seems like we are effectively in a holding pattern. No one appears to think the government is going to reopen anytime soon, especially while the two sides are just this far apart. In fact, the issue of this ongoing partial government shutdown doesn't really even seem to be affecting the schedule up here. Lawmakers were on vacation, effectively on recess last week. There's no indication that they'll stay through the weekend, this coming weekend, to try and iron out a solution. So at this point, even though a department of the federal government, the Department of Homeland Security, is in a shutdown, FEMA, TSA employees, Coast Guard employees not getting paid, and U.S. Secret Service, it seems like it's still business as usual up here as lawmakers try and find some sort of way to reopen the government. Not even sure, though, Del, at this point, that those conversations are happening regularly.
Nate, I got to ask you before you go, did you manage to get a selfie with the Team USA, the hockey team?
I did not. They were located one gallery over from where we were sitting in the chamber. My print press colleagues, though, some of my good friends up here on Capitol Hill, quite surprised to see them come out of the Congressional Press Gallery into the chamber last night. So certainly a highlight moment. My seatmate, actually, in the broadcast area where I was in the House chamber last night, did spring up and run to go take a photo with them. I, of course, as you know, stayed in my seat, Del.
As you know, by the way, there will be those cardboard cutouts pretty soon on the streets of Washington, D.C., where you and I will get our pictures taken. Scripps News senior congressional correspondent Nate Reed for us on Capitol Hill. Nate, thank you very much. More fallout today from the Jeffrey Epstein case. Larry Summers, retiring from his post at Harvard University, comes after new details about his past association surfaced involving the convicted pedophile. New emails showing Summers and Epstein talking as recently as 2018. That's years after Epstein pleaded guilty in 2008 to those state prostitution charges with a minor, but before his 2019 arrest on federal sex trafficking charges. Summers was also Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary. Aston Martin cutting 20% of its global workforce, blaming tariffs for the decision. The British automaker saying that amounts to about 600 jobs. Aston Martin says it lost more than $500 million last year. European car makers have struggled since President Trump hit them with a 25% tariff last fall for both cars and car parts. Enter Sandman in Las Vegas. Metallica announcing a residency at the Sphere. They will play 8 shows in October and Thursday and Saturday. The legendary rock band promises no songs will be repeated on those back-to-back nights. Tickets go on sale on March 6th.
Got to take a quick break, but we'll be back in just a moment as we continue tracking today's top news. for joining us again on Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer with your daily look at the day's biggest stories.
The Supreme Court issuing a ruling this morning in a case involving a former immigrant. Pits the detainee against the corporate owner of the detention center where he was locked up. The justice saying that the GEO group is not immune from a lawsuit brought by that detainee. It involved claims of forced labor. Now the case could open the floodgates for other lawsuits from migrants that are being held at private ICE detention centers nationwide. Our Scripps News ICE Inc. investigative series have uncovered evidence that these companies have been raking in billions of dollars since President Trump retook the White House. And our senior investigative correspondent, Patrick Terpstra, joins us now. And Patrick, 9-0, the ruling by the Supreme Court, not what you see every day, but they were pretty unanimous on this one.
Yeah, pretty surprising. And on this issue that has essentially given a whole bunch of new tools to immigrants that are held in these for-profit detention centers. This is a case that goes all the way back to 2014, and it's a class action lawsuit involving a migrant named Alejandro Menacol. He was held at a for-profit detention center in Aurora, Colorado, owned and operated by the GEO Group. In that detention center, there were policies that he and his attorneys say required work. For one thing, it said that you had to clean the common areas, and if you failed to do so as an immigrant detainee, you would be put in solitary confinement for 72 hours, and by the way, wouldn't make a penny. There was also a volunteer program where any detainee that wanted to make food or do the laundry could make up to $1 a day. So Menacol and his attorney saying essentially this was forced labor and that this violated state and federal labor laws. They went to the Supreme Court, but the case had nothing to do with the forced labor issue. This case in front of the Supreme Court was over whether this company, GEO Group, could be immune because they were doing work for the federal government under a contract with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. GEO Group saying that because this was under the authorization and direction of the federal government, that they as a company enjoyed all the same immunity protections that the federal government also gets. Well, the Supreme Court had a different take on that. Take a look at this quote we pulled from the ruling today. Quote, "Sovereign immunity is not transferable to government agents. The court has repeatedly held that the government's immunity from suit does not extend to those that act in its name. Instead," it goes on to say, "sovereign immunity belongs alone to the government." So this case now gets kicked back down into the lower courts where it could actually head to trial. This is something people were watching very closely because had the justices said that GEO Group was immune, it would essentially lock out all of these detainees that are held in for-profit prisons, jails, and detention centers from actually being able to challenge any of the policies that are happening on the inside. So the case back now into the lower courts, and we will be watching to see where this ends up, Del.
Patrick, what is the bigger picture, though? Because we're talking about possibly tens of thousands of migrants, immigrants that are locked up in these detention centers.
Absolutely, and these are private companies that are owning and operating these places. 90% of all immigrants are held in these types of detention centers. And the question is, what rights do they have? Can they challenge the policies about what kind of meals they get, the medical care they get, when things go wrong, if they feel like they are not able to see their attorneys? What is the recourse that they have? These companies are no longer going to be able to say, we have blanket immunity, blanket protections. Essentially, this Supreme Court ruling, according to a lot of observers, gives these migrants the ability now to challenge their circumstances and take it maybe all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Scripps News senior investigative correspondent Patrick Terpstra. Patrick, as always, we thank you.
Straight ahead on Today As It Happened.
I want to create a contrast for you as well, which is that while Donald Trump was drowning on in a really long speech, Democrats actually won 3 elections. We won 3 special elections, 2 in Pennsylvania, 1 in Maine. And this is the consistent theme we've seen since Donald Trump has come into office. People are not happy.
Over the last year, through DOGE, mass firings, and the appointment of deeply unserious people to our nation's most serious positions, our president has endangered the long and storied history of the United States of America. being a force for good.
Joining me now for more reaction from the Democratic perspective is Hannah Moldavan. She's the Deputy Communications Director for the Democratic National Committee. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thanks, Holly. It's great to be here with you.
So, Hannah, how did last night's speech really frame the contrast between Democrats and Republicans as we head into the next election cycle?
Well, you showed clips from Abigail Spanberger's speech, which was fantastic, I thought, right on point. Very patriotic. She talked about the 250th anniversary of our country, but also zeroed in on the main question to Americans, which is, do you think that Donald Trump is working for you? Abigail Spanberger talked about how affordability was the thing that Democrats were focused on. It's the main reason why she won. She campaigned on it on the trail when she won this past year in November of 2025 to flip that governor's mansion from red to blue. And when you look at that speech compared to Donald Trump, it couldn't be more different. We saw the longest speech on record for Trump's State of the Union this year. I think it was a desperate attempt to try to sell the American people that they're winning, when the American people know that they're not. Prices are higher than ever before. In fact, in 2025, households paid an average of $2,120 more because of Donald Trump's tariffs and inflation. So we saw that last night from him trying to sell it, versus Abigail Spanberger, who won on affordability and day one when she got elected to the governor's mansion, signed an executive order trying to lower costs for Virginians.
And Hannah, in that speech last night, I mean, he did talk about it, and he also took aim at the Democrats quite a bit. What was your takeaway from those specific moments and how those Democrats responded?
You know, Democrats knew going into tonight that Donald Trump was going to lie. He said that costs were down. We all know that costs aren't down, Holly. And so we saw that from him last night. I want to create a contrast for you as well, which is that while Donald Trump was drowning on in a really long speech, Democrats actually won 3 elections. We won 3 special elections, 2 in Pennsylvania, 1 in Maine. And this is the consistent theme we've seen since Donald Trump has come into office. People are not happy with him. He has a 36% approval rating. That's the lowest for any president at this point in their term, including Donald Trump in his first term. So while Donald Trump is not putting up a good agenda for the American people, they're going out, they're voting. Since he was elected office in 2025, Democrats have actually won or overperformed in 90% of key elections by an average of 13 points over performance. So we know that Donald Trump is not delivering for the American people, and they are looking to the Democrats to try to put a check on him.
You mentioned what the Americans are telling you as far as the cost of living, that it's not coming down. They're feeling the pinch. One of the things that, one of the issues that many Americans are facing and perhaps wanted to hear a lot about last night was the cost of health care, another major issue facing everyone today. The president did address the price of prescription drugs. Take a listen to what he said last night, and I want to get your response.
My just enacted most favored nation agreements, Americans who have for decades paid by far the highest prices of any nation anywhere in the world for prescription drugs will now pay the lowest price anywhere in the world for drugs, anywhere, the lowest price.
So, Hannah, do you think voters will be satisfied with this, or is this something that Democrats really need to lean in on, the whole issue of health care, not just this specific lane?
Holly, I'm so glad you brought up healthcare. During his 108-minute speech, less than 5 minutes were focused on healthcare, which, besides affordability, is a top issue for Americans, specifically the cost of healthcare, which I just have to mention that since Trump was in office, healthcare has spiked for millions of Americans because Republicans failed to pass those ACA premium tax care credits. And millions have been kicked off their healthcare because of the Republicans' permanent bill that they passed last year. So healthcare has not been a winning issue for Republicans. We know that Trump's advisors know that talking about healthcare isn't good for them. So it was interesting to see him talk about how he was lowering the cost of prescription drugs. I will mention that these proposals, these deals he's making with these drug companies, the 16 companies he said he's made deals with actually increased the cost of their generic drugs last year. So the art of the deal is not working out for Trump or the American people. We saw him say that last night. It was another lie from him. And we know that Democrats can be trusted more on healthcare than Republicans can, and they even know that.
And Hannah, you had mentioned approval ratings, and we know President the polls are showing that they are down. But Americans are not happy with the political angst in Washington. There's not a lot of bipartisanship, and Americans are saying they're tired of it because Democrats are not doing that well either. So what are you guys doing to improve your image as well?
The Democratic Party lost the presidential election in 2024, and we know that we have to do better. We're taking a look at what we can do better, and one of those things are listening to the American people. We've listened to what they've said. They are talking about higher costs. They don't like what they see in Washington. I don't either. We want our Democrats and Republicans working together to make life better for working people, but we don't see that with the Republicans. It's interesting. Democrats don't have a lot of power right now in Washington. Republicans control the White House, the Senate, and Congress. But House Democrats actually successfully passed 2 discharge petitions. These are things where they get some Republicans on board, so they get Republicans to pass a bipartisan resolution that overrides the Speaker, Speaker Johnson, and gets a vote on the House floor. Those 2 things were about releasing the Epstein files and making sure that we could extend ACA premium tax care credit. So even when Democrats don't have power in Washington right now, we're trying to work in a bipartisan way. It's really hard when you're working with someone like Donald Trump, but I understand where the American people are coming from, and Democrats want to get to that point where we can lower costs for working families, and we'll work with Republicans to do that.
And we know the DNC commissioned an autopsy report of what went wrong in 2024, but it hasn't been released yet. Will you release it?
The North Star right now for us is winning. And so we want to focus on doing that. I mentioned this before, but Democrats are winning right now. We have taken lessons from the 2024 election. One of those is voter registration, for example. Between 2020 and 2024, Democrats lost a net 2.1 million registered Democrats. Republicans gained 2.4 million. What are we doing here? We fell behind when it came to voter registration. So actually this year we launched a new initiative. It's called When We Count. We're targeting states like Arizona and Nevada to register new voters. Voters, frankly, the Democrats have taken for granted in the past. Latino voters, Black voters, young voters. We're going out not just to college campuses, but where people live to register them as Democrats. We know we lost in 2024. We have some lessons from that, and we're already taking them into action. And we're focused on the one thing that we need to do to check Donald Trump and make life better for working Americans, and that's winning.
Hannah Moldavan, Deputy Communications Director for the Democratic National Committee. We appreciate you taking your time to spend with us this morning on Scripps News, and we know we're heading into a busy election year, midterm elections. We hope you'll come back to Scripps News and share your thoughts again.
Thanks, Holly.
Thanks for spending part of your evening with us on Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Have a superb Wednesday night.